Please welcome the incredible Gabby Reece.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to chat with you.
Well, hopefully it's not, I always joke with some of my friends about be careful about talking to people that all think you've seen for a few years that you might be interested in.
Yeah, they say don't meet your heroes, right?
Well, I didn't use the word hero. I just mean like, even if someone's been on your radar and you think, oh, I think I might like them. Maybe don't. Oh. I'm just kidding. We'll have fun.
No, there is a saying, they say, don't meet your heroes because you might be disappointed. Yeah. And I've met a lot of my heroes in the last couple of weeks and I'm not disappointed ever. I feel like you put out a lot of great content for us to get really great understanding of who you are. But long story short is my history is from when you played pro beach volleyball in the 90s. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you were a model. Was it model first? Volleyball player?
Yeah, well, actually it was volleyball. They were sort of dual when I was in college. I was playing at Florida State indoor, and that's when I started modeling. I had sort of been seen before that as like a junior in high school. And then I waited to kind of pursue that until after I had been in college. And then I did both of those things in college. And it's different NIL, name and likeness, that a lot of college athletes have right now. We didn't have that. So actually after my second season, I gave up my scholarship and paid to play. But once I turned professional, I could make a living as an athlete. It didn't matter about my image. Then I sort of wasn't, modeling per se. It was really a means, like a means to an end.
Right. And then, so that was back in the 90s. And then you met Laird, who is
I did. I
big
met
wave
Laird
surfer
in 95. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So you guys have incredible personal brands and you've accomplished a lot of things, right? Did he not set a world record for something?
Laird has an interesting sport. He rides very large waves and he's like, well, how do you measure that? So I don't know if there's been official framework about any of this. And I think it makes him giggle when people are like trying to measure waves and records and all of that. So, let's just say he's been involved with riding a lot of
big waves.
larger waves. Yeah.
Has he ever done, what's that wave in just off the coast of Lisbon?
Yeah, he actually, they do something called hydrofoiling, and you're speaking about Nazare, and there's actually a wave on the side of Nazare, the wave that you're discussing by the lighthouse, that they foiled, because I think there's a lot of interesting, and it doesn't really matter, but it's actually Nazare is a sort of a peak where two waves are compressed and coming together, and so for what Laird likes to do, there was actually a better sort of environment right next to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Those waves were huge. We went last year and I couldn't believe it. I mean, just the sound of them was insane.
Yeah. Rumble.
And then just the people too. It's a pretty cool, dangerous sport.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into this, but okay. So you have pro beach volleyball player, model, building this brand, building businesses now come together. And you guys have like nutrition business, you have an apparel company, you have XPT, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A bunch of stuff you guys are building, which is incredible. How do you support each other through those separate ambitions?
I think it's there's probably a couple, and all types of people would do it differently. I think, to oversimplify it, sometimes the willingness to be the farmer and the willingness to be the flower, right? You're ebbing and flowing out of these roles. And I think for both Laird and I, it starts with our individual autonomy and self-care and kind of discovery of one's own voice, like keeping that alive simultaneously to being in this partnership and to being, other roles like moms and dads and all these other things. So I think both of us do pretty instinctively a better job of that, which then enables us when we do come together. We are, even though maybe from the outside it seems like we have a lot of similarities. We always say that our values are very similar, but actually we're really different, which can be great because then we're bringing different skill sets to the environment. And there's trust, and that you defer to the other if they really seem passionate about it. And of course, you step on each other's toes. Do it daily, weekly, and that seems to be part of it. But it feels really like it derives back to each individual still being who they are and bringing that and those passions and wants and dreams into then these bigger situations.
So when you propose a business idea to him, is it, so when you guys build these things, is it together or is it separate of each other?
Well, okay. So for example, Laird Superfood was born, not by accident, but probably by accident, I would say. We had a friend, Laird was making these drinks, concoctions around fats and coffee, not a new practice, by the way, but sharing it with his friends that he trained with. And everybody was always feeling good and being like, this tastes amazing. And I can go, Laird was using it for his own needs to go surf for 5-6 hours at a time. And so we had a friend that he was sharing this with, and he said, we should be able to do something with this. So that was something that was really organic. And actually XPT, the fitness arm of our world, is also really organic. We were doing this training at our house, and a really close friend of mine, who's the co-founder of that with us, was like, if you could condense this and somehow share this with other people, a lot of people might be able to benefit from it. So I think in our case, it's us pursuing the things that we're genuinely interested in, and we're trying to use it in our own life. And that if there seemed to be a greater value, it was like, okay, then what's the strategy on how you would create a business around this?
Right. And you guys have an apparel line too. I'm assuming this fits tall women. I'm 6 feet tall.
Let me tell you, we have a legging. I wanted to call it the Keep It Together legging, where, it's like you're just kind of in there. But of course, I have a 36 or 37 inch inseam. So they're very long, very compressed. The material's really thick, because for me, I think yes, I want it to be cute. Of course, people wear their gym clothes in a million other environments after. But if you were going to really get down and train hard, they would keep up with you. So it is thoughtful, but we have to live somewhere between my height and, the kind of everyone else.
The rest of the world.
Yeah. Well,
how tall are you?
I'm 6'3".
Yeah, that's tall.
Yeah. I think it is pretty tall. It just depends where I am. When I hang out with a bunch of female athletes or volleyball players, it's so unbelievably typical. And then, I never perceive myself as that tall. And then you go out and you do realize it's tall.
Well, and then shopping is one thing too, because I feel like I'm just at that cusp with a 35-inch inseam that I can get away with stuff. Yeah. But then it's like you get that. It's like if I was any taller, everything gets wider too. It doesn't stay the same width. So is that part of the reason why you created the apparel line? It
is. And the apparel line was originally created for men and men only, because there was this notion of there was sort of some white space there. And how do you have men that are between, I'm going to make it up, 40 and 65? They're super active. They take care of themselves. They probably don't want to wear their teenage or young adult son's clothing, but they haven't given up. So it's like there was this white space that made more sense. Women's apparel is super competitive, as you know, and there's a lot of options. But after the brand living for about 5 or 6 years, I'm not going to lie, I was excited that they were like, let's do some women's stuff. That I put my hand up and I thought, let's talk about a really badass legging and tight that people can mix and match with a bunch of stuff, but that it really works.
Yeah, I've dreamed of this. So one of our friends was the creator of Sax underwear. You know, the ones that come with like a little mesh for the men's parts. And I asked her how, because it was her brother that had developed it. And when I asked her how they do it, there was like this whole design thing. I mean, you know this whole thing. Yeah. And I said to her, I want to start a line of jeans that are comfortable for tall women, that aren't like structured, that are so tight. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I'm not in this space. Yeah, I'm so thankful when somebody does make pants long enough.
Yeah, I know. Well, so jeans, we actually have jeans at Laird Apparel, but I will tell you other brands. Midheaven has some 36-inch inseams, and Frame typically will offer some really long inseams. So, yeah, I'll put those out there. That's one beautiful thing about online, right? Is you can really drill down and save yourself some time and misery in a fitting room at a store, because you can just, look up the fit and size.
Yeah, I don't even shop anymore. It's like, I know it's going to be too short. Even when friends are like, these pants are too long on me, they're going to fit you. No, they won't. They will not fit me. Nice try. Okay, so back to this. What internal strengths have you developed to be able to handle those really tough situations?
I think it's separating your perspective. I think we sort of have a tendency to separate things out. Like, this is good and that's bad, and this is hard and that's fun. And I think maybe over the years, being an entrepreneur for so many years, I think I reframed how I looked at everything, and instead of when things are challenging or you don't have the flow, or they're not going your way, or there's a glitch, or the million things that happen in any number of one of these businesses, is, oh yes, this too is part of the process. And not to have distance from it, but to keep enough distance that you realize it's not the end of the world. And that if you're going to be in anything for a long period of time, especially if you're trying to grow something and make something truly successful, you're going to come around the corner, weekly to new interesting things that are happening. So I think for me, that suits my personality. By nature, I'm not overly emotional. And I think sports certainly helped fortify kind of some grit to be like, oh, this is really uncomfortable and it's hard, but I don't want it to take me down. And again, just that perspective, it's like in life, if you can really keep your eyes and your mind on knowing what's truly, truly important and what's really worth getting upset about, it comes up, it's not that many things.
It's true. It's so true. I had a couple tiny things that happened very close together. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel. This is it. I don't need this. So in those moments where you felt them too, how do you reframe your mindset to come back and be like, keep going?
Well, first of all, let yourself feel it. Tell somebody, I think that's the most important thing. I think eating it and stuffing it is a no-go. As long as it's not like every day, right? Like, as long as it's like it's sort of within reason. And then that's why I train the way I do and I eat the way I do, because those are the tools that give me the space to be like, okay, I'm maybe a little extra tired today and I'm having a temper tantrum, and that's okay. I'll give myself that grace. And now let me really ask myself, is this such a big deal? And then behind that, what I think is really important is, what's the lesson? Or, kind of using these as the opportunity of either a new learning moment. So you go, okay, I'm going to have to either figure out a solution or develop a new skill. But I don't want to miss the lesson, because also the idea would be, if I'm going to go through this, then the other side, hopefully I come out a little more improved, a little more experienced, a little more knowledgeable, that then helps me as I'm going on this journey.
Do you ever get hung up on the lesson?
What do you mean?
Like, you can't get it out of your head. Like this, for instance, I stood up on a lunch date yesterday, and this was right after
a meeting business lunch date.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And this was right after I committed to my New Year's resolution. The number one thing was to be punctual. I literally wrote it down and shared it with my husband. Here's my number one thing for 2024 is to be punctual. And I was 10 minutes early for that meeting, of which it was the first meeting I made that commitment. And I was like, I'm still hung up on the lesson, like trying to figure out what it is that I need to learn from this. I actually texted my husband right after, and I said, oh, that hurts. And like, even when I was looking at my phone, it was 12:01 and our coffee or our lunch date was at 12. I still felt like they're late. And I did that to people, right? Showing up late. But do you ever get hung up on that lesson, like trying to figure it out? Why did I need to go through that?
No, well, yeah, I more question it when it's like, I've gone through this 4 times. Like, what am I missing that I still am not getting it? Right. I think the great thing for me, like my mind at first, I certainly would be, have that, probably because of my ego, sense of indignance, like, oh, my time's valuable and people, whatever. And then I would be like, the answer is right there. I probably won't be working with this person. Right. Unless there was a real reason, which things happen. But let's say it was just like they forgot, they spaced it, they whatever. But for me, I would be like, oh, well, maybe I'm being protected here, that I'm not really supposed to be wound up, bundled up with this person in any way. And so I'm actually being spared something. So I have a tendency to try to, once I get through my own, like I said, ego, is to look beyond that and say, all right, what are you being offered here as well? And take that and move on. And again, that goes still back always to perspective. It's like, is it a big deal? No, you gained an extra 45 minutes in your day because you were supposed to be in this meeting. They blew you off. Okay, do something else. So I think for me, I have a tendency to try to do that, because also it is what it is. Mm-hmm. And if it didn't work out the way I wanted to, me banging my head or not getting on with it is me re-injuring myself over and over in something that I'm not going to change. And so I have the tendency, and again, I think this comes back to sports, which is like, next point, moving on. Because otherwise, when we get stuck back there, we don't get the benefit of moving on and changing the direction of whatever path it is that we're trying to pursue.
That is such a good perspective. I'm getting better at this. Now I want to so going to the sport component of this too. Mm-hmm. So my son's team, like they play league and they made it to the finals, which is Friday night, which is awesome. He played terribly, but he knows it. Here's what happened with this team is came out and they were like 25 points ahead. And then the other team caught up and they demolished this team before. When you're playing sport, do you ever get that part where your ego is, because you're just crushing it? Your ego's so strong that when you're ahead, you start to pull back. Do you ever see this like in sports or in life, parenting, business? And what do you do about it?
Well, I think that has a couple answers to it. So I think, and again, I'm comfortable with overgeneralizing on this. If it was male, they would be like, oh, I'm crushing this team. I don't need to work as hard. Okay. Mm-hmm. With a female athlete, some, not all, it's a little bit of that. And it also could be, I really want to win, but I don't want to really hurt the other person's or team's feelings. I know that you wouldn't think that's possible, but especially when you're younger, I think that is a really real thing for female athletes typically. So it would have to be my why. What was my reasoning? I'm typically not a person who would be winning and then think, oh, we got this. But I might have been when I was younger, somebody who it's like, oh, this is a good enough gap. You don't have to be, trying to kill yourself to keep going, if that makes sense, because it's more about the other side. Then you get a little more experience and you learn you have to finish the job, and it's not personal. And you're there for a job. And so focus on that and do that. And that took some years, though. That's not something that, and I know a few female athletes, they typically have a lot of older brothers that do that well. They've had practice of that language for a long time. So for me, it's a dance. And in business, I think if it is going well, that's the opportunity to go, okay, there's a little bit of wiggle room to figure out and have the luxury to try to navigate what the goals are for the future. Because a lot of times in business, if you're just trying to grow and keep up and do the thing, you don't even get that luxury. So if things are really rolling, then it's like, okay, let's gather and get creative and have a strategy for the future, because that is a luxury.
It is such a luxury. But do you ever feel yourselves, and you probably not you, but maybe in other female entrepreneur circles, where they actually start to achieve those goals in business and they slow themselves because they are so afraid of getting too far ahead.
Success is as scary as failure. And again, even more so for females, because I'll give you a quick story. I had a volleyball coach, incredible guy, Gary Sato. He worked he was an assistant coach for the indoor men's U.S. Olympic team. And this was a team that was highly talented. I think they won 2 or 3 gold medals. Very tough, talented crew of athletes. Their coach, a high-level coach, end of a game, probably a gold medal match. They all come together in the timeout, a lot of stress. Coach Marv says to Karch Karai, the player, we're going to give you the ball. You're going to put the ball away. Let's put the ball away and let's win this game. Boom, boom, fast forward. Everything goes as planned. Okay, so Gary logged that and thought, oh, I'm going to use that someday. He is coaching a women's indoor team, and he does that, and he isolates a player who strategically was the right player, right? He said all the body language, all the girls turned away, because one thing for women is somehow we don't want to be separated. We don't want to be outside the pack. It's very hard. It's harder for us to go, I'll do it. Or if we're successful, then all of a sudden we're not a part of, or the perception is we're not a part of the group. So it's an interesting conundrum when you're like, I'm in pursuit. I want to kick ass. I want to turn this into a behemoth company. Oh, but don't single me out, and I don't want attention and all of these things. So it's really, really natural, but you just have to realize it isn't for us to understand why we get to. It's for us to appreciate it and say, oh, this is such an exciting opportunity. How far could I go with it? And could I be a person that's doing it in a way that is a way that I would admire? Because I think that's important. I think it's so important to be a person who's in pursuit of success in a way that's ethical and all of these other things, because then you show other people it is possible.
I love that. Yeah. Someone said to me not that long ago that if you feel like you don't deserve a seat at the table, or you don't feel like you belong, is be the place where people feel like they belong. So turn the table, and that's it. It's like, also women are looking for that extra encouragement to feel like they're allowed to be there and they should be there. It's tough.
I also think that listen, the reality is progress is made through cooperation, not through competition. So innately, in some ways, and this isn't a knock on men, I think women are emotionally a little more in tune with, like, it's kind of silly, some of it. It's like, it's not that none of this really matters, but it's kind of like, this is kind of silly also, because I feel that we naturally are interested in being connected and relationships and these kinds of things. So just going out and kicking ass and growing something at times makes us kind of think it's like, well, what are we doing? And what am I spending my time doing? And I think that's a really real thing. And I think it's great, but it's just knowing that if somebody handed you the baton, if the universe, the gods handed you the baton and said, okay, it's your turn, there's your seat, go sit at the table, that trust in that and the gratitude of that would be cool. I don't understand why I get to. By the way, most everybody feels like they're in, over their head, and I'm just going to show up.
Mm-hmm. It's like me last week. I was in a mastermind with people in the business world whom I've admired for years. And I'm sitting in this room masterminding, right? So I'm giving them business advice. And I'm like, where is ChatGPT when I need this?
Yeah.
It's crazy how you can still provide that advice to people who are not chapters, but books ahead of you. Because if you, just like you said, if you believe that you deserve to be there, God put you there for a reason.
Yeah. And the thing is, what do any of us deserve? I think and I say this a lot, people will complain, it's not fair. And I'm like, yes, and it is also not fair in our favor. So the notion of grace and receiving grace and doing something about it, like, okay, great, we're complaining about the way the corporate world is run, where we complain about, the way people practice business, then get in there and be a part of how it can look different.
Yeah. And it's different. Okay. So my husband wanted me to ask you this question.
Okay.
I'm like, hey, Dan. So my husband's Dan. I'm going to ask some questions to Reece or Gabby today. And he's like, I want to know, how do you support Laird when he's having a hard day? Obviously that was selfish for Dan, but also I want to know, how does he support you? How do you guys come together in those moments?
Well, we're really different. Laird is way more emotional and tactile. So the way to support him is to, first of all, not be like, what's your problem? Because that's a tendency, right? I just go, oh, okay, my guy's having a tough go of it. I'm going to first approach lightly and with love. And it's not that I ignore, because also you have to realize I'm 28 years in. So Laird has made a lot of deposits. So it's not like I'm unsure about reciprocity or if he's showing up. The guy's showing up. So what he has, in my mind, certainly deserves, that I desire, that he's earned, is the right to have space to just go through whatever you're going through and not make it something between us, because it's not. So it's a thing of moving in lovingly, not taking it personal, knowing when it's too much for me and I just kind of move away. And then, if I'm unsure, not maybe in the heat of the moment, if someone's really having a go, but just being like, hey, is there anything you'd like to talk about? Or is there anything, not what's your problem? Because that never really works, right? So I think I wait, I have good timing, and it's also just appreciating that all of these traits, typically of why Laird's having a hard day, is still ultimately connected to most of the traits that I really love and appreciate and admire about him. So I just kind of remember like that restlessness that he has, all this, whatever stomping around is, this is the guy who gets stuff done and also is connected to nature and just, there. And for me, Laird is supportive of whatever I would like to do. Now, having said that and being realistic, I think he makes it really clear as my partner what he really likes and needs, and it's pretty simple. And so I think that the hope from him is that it feels comfortable for me to show up in those ways. And then he's like, yeah, knock yourself out, like do whatever you want to do. And for me, it's usually, I need someone to listen if I'm trying to work out ideas. And then maybe just kind of let me have the space to kind of rumble through it.
So 28 years together.
Yeah.
When did all of this, I don't want to say it becomes easier, because marriage regardless is going to be hard, but when did things get easier in your marriage?
I think both Laird and I don't come from particularly, backgrounds where there was a ton of role models. And so we really did a lot of fumbling. And I always say it's like you're learning to dance, but you're really stepping on each other's feet quite a bit. So for the first 5 years, there was tons of, of course, you have passion and chemistry and all of these things. And I didn't have a particularly great skill set of communication or conflict resolution. And Laird was also having his own dance with alcohol, and it was very quiet. It was wine. It was always at home, but it was very real. And so we almost got divorced in 2000, and we came so close to it that it made both of us go, okay, right, let's rejigger here. Let's figure out. Let's get some better, skills. And then I would say by the time I was pregnant with my second daughter, so we are a solid 12 years in. And so for the last 16 years, I have to say it's been pretty peaceful, but both Laird and I think, try our best to adapt. I don't feel us having the same arguments quite often. We're not in the loop. And I think it's like, okay, what's the issue? And he's actually really the reason he doesn't let things build up if he sees something or he sees something even in my face, he's like, what's going on with you? Because I could probably pack it down a little bit. And so I think it's also learning for me personally to be courageous. It's vulnerable to be in a relationship. It's scary to tell somebody what you want and need. And, you have to be willing to say, hey, it's okay. I forgive you. And you have to be willing to say you're sorry, and create those safe spaces for each other. So when you do say sorry, that person isn't hitting you over the head with it a week later and vice versa. Right. So I think it's all these little nuanced things coming together, that do make the dance easier, but it's really still at the end, each person's responsibility to, I'm quoting Tony Robbins. I can't believe it, but it's the idea. I have the intention to serve the relationship. And that really is powerful. And when you're with somebody who they're on the same page, then I think it makes it a lot easier.
Now, and I can't imagine this would be the case. Were there ever moments in both of your careers where someone was a little bit more ahead?
Oh, yeah.
Was there any sort of like resentment, or were you guys just each other's biggest cheerleaders throughout it all?
Oh, no. We're very intense, weird, competitive people. So I think when I first met Laird, worldly wise, I was more successful, if that makes sense. I think Laird's relationship with his craft is far supreme than myself with volleyball. Like there's no comparison on the relationship that Laird has and the capabilities of surfing. But in the world, so money, attention, all the silly things, I was ahead. I don't know that was so easy for Laird. He certainly tried his best. And it was a very uncomfortable dance. And then it was kind of interesting. Then he sort of started getting more well-known. I started having children. So of course, by nature and by choice, I started kind of laying low and he came up. And then what's so cool about that is you realize it's kind of all bullshit. It's like, we're on this journey together. It's going to go up and down a million times. If you're crushing it, I'm stoked for you. What's good for you is good for us and vice versa. But you got to kind of go through that one or two times. Now, if it's only one person killing all the time and the other person's the person that the people turn their shoulder to at dinner conversations, I would imagine that gets old. So as long as there's some kind of flow, and listen, it's a different dance. If you have like one partner who's saying, hey, based on all the, reading the landscape on whose time is more valuable monetarily, it'll make more sense for me to stay home, whatever those conversations are. I just think it's really important that people get that space now. And again, it's incorporated, not that like one's charging all the time and one's along for the ride.
I totally get it. When I first started dating my husband, he had just finished having one of his startup acquired, and we were living in the Valley, and I looked like his publicist. Funny enough, I'm in PR. So very well could have been a publicist. And I was so insulted by it, even though he'd introduced me as his girlfriend at the time, then fiance and now wife. But here's the thing that happened, which was so beautiful, is in the last like 5 years, he's really started to grow. He launched a Wall Street Journal bestseller book, and now it's like in the hands of so many people. And both him and I were shocked at how well it did. It changed the landscape. But what he did that I think he knew was important to me was, and it started out as a joke, but he started incorporating me into a lot of those conversations. And so like he would get an invite to somewhere. Oh yeah, for sure. Let me check if Renee wants to join, or Renee can be there. Yeah. That was huge. And now he introduces me to people all the time who need help with PR. And it's great. Never a point of resentment towards him, never a point of jealousy, but I always ask myself, why can't I do that? Where am I missing the golden nugget to achieve the success that he has? And guess what? He's taught me every single time, and I still have not executed on it.
Well, we're all, that's the thing, even though we're in a coupleton, we're on our own unique paths, learning our own unique lessons. And the urge to compare is so powerful, even with our lover. And that's why I say, like, when you realize it's BS, because no one ever even thinks about this. What if, for example, you have one partner who, for whatever reason, they're hyper fluid and they just can like start a business, sell a business, start another business, do whatever. Yeah. Maybe the other, if you choose to have kids, stays home, and they get to experience And it's slow and it's not sexy and you don't get a paycheck for it, but they get to experience things about the family that the other partner will never get to. And so I think it's also paying attention to the richness in kind of all the things and not worrying about, you know, your title or people know what you do or how much money you bring in. And it's easy to say, but you realize that ultimately some person at a dinner banquet knowing if I do X or Y doesn't really change my life. Why do I care? And I don't know, the idea of, you know, being able to really take in the relationships that are your life, if that's the side you're on, pretty great.
It's true. It's a good point. And they say that it's something like in like 3 generations from now, people are going to start to forget your name. Right? Yeah. At the end of the day, it's like,
yeah,
we're on a spinning ball going through the atmosphere, through the universe. Like,
well, and when you don't care, let me tell you, when you show up to a place and you don't care,
yeah,
people find you. And I think at the end of the day, it's like if the people that love you ask you like, hey, how was your day? Pretty good. Everything else, it's like, what, some guy's going to kiss your ass because you're the CEO or the founder of the thing. It's like, that's semi-transactional anyway. It's like, who cares? Like, who cares?
I mean, that's like what you expressed was that's the ultimate form of freedom, is just being there and not caring.
No, because it doesn't matter and nobody cares. Everybody cares about themselves.
Yeah.
So when you go there, it's like, I own the business. And they're like, amazing, because they have something they'd like to sell you. But do they really care? They don't care. They're interested in their own success. So everything you do should be because you really want to. And the people who give a shit about you care about you not because of some kind of accomplishment. It's how you're showing up as a person in the world and in the relationships. And yeah, it doesn't mean it doesn't get under your feathers and you're like, hey, but ultimately I feel like if you do it long enough, you're like, who cares?
Whatever. Yeah. It's not what you do, it's who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to your marriage, what is something that you do that is unique to you guys that you think more people need to do?
Well, I don't think anything, well, I'm sure nothing's unique. Okay. I've talked about this a little bit. I have my face can be pretty serious. I wake up pretty slow. I mean, I'm just more quiet. My husband wakes up with a lot of energy and ready to go. And maybe, I don't know, 12 or 15 so years ago, I started thinking to myself, okay, I adore Laird. I deeply love and respect him. I would like him to know that. But the indication is not on my face. So he's always up before me. When I come down, when I enter the kitchen and I know I'm going to see him, I made a commitment that I would have a smile on my face. I mean, unless there's really something heavy, but 99.9% of the time. And with an open, wide smile, good morning, a hug and a kiss, because what that does is it sets the tone for the morning. And it makes it clear to him, this person is really happy. And it seems like they're happy to be here and be here with me. And I always felt that way, but sometimes you'd see my face and it was like, oh, well, how are you doing? So that for me to be the first one, because Laird was always the first one to apologize. And I really learned a lot from that because I was always very prideful. And I was like, I'm not saying sorry, So I think that learning to apologize quickly, but also just when you greet, okay, for example, if you're home with the kids and your partner comes in and you go, you can't, like this person's already been working for 8 to 10 hours, even though that's easier in certain ways than being home with kids. But if you look at them in the eyeball and you look at them and you're like, hey, how was your day? They see love in your eyes. You can get into all that stuff, but just give it a beat because it really sets the tone where you can do it together versus opposing, and you usually have the same goals. And so that has really been just a nice tool.
Yeah, I love that. We call those takeoff and landings. Have you heard that expression before?
Yeah.
And it's like 2 seconds where you just it doesn't even have to be with your significant other. It could be with your kids and people in the room. But if you were leaving the house or leaving the building to go for the day, you let them know.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, have a great day. Big kiss. He would just, like, Dan at some points would just leave. And I'd be like, where are you? He's like, I'm gone. I went for a hike. Oh, yeah. I'm like, well, I knew he was going, but still.
Yeah.
Maybe
try teenagers. Wait till you have teenagers.
Oh, I'm a couple years away from that.
I'm like, to my youngest daughter, who's a teenage, my last one, she's a teenager. Sometimes I'm like, good morning. And then she leaves. I'm like, have a great day, you know?
Okay. So speaking of parenting, so 3 girls, right? And I don't want to say the word parenting hacks, but what is something that you guys did that, I mean, maybe you even still do today, that was so powerful to be connected to your kids?
I think it's something that I had to be reminded, which was to listen without fixing, which was to not solve their problems, not impose my opinion on them. If they were sharing something about their lives, I wasn't going to give unsolicited advice. And sitting in my car, I will say this, and every parent knows this, when you have kids starting at about 11 or 12, all the magic happens in those super inconvenient car rides to and from wherever your million sports events or school driving or friend drop-offs. And I say, like, especially when you have teenagers, they tell you things that make you uncomfortable. You know, like my friend was doing this at a party, and in there you're thinking you're in the room with somebody who's doing that, but that's not the point. The point is that they're sharing with you. You want them to continue to share with you. So I always say, I just squeeze the steering wheel. And then as a follow-up, I've talked a little bit about this. If it sort of feels worth going a little deeper, I will ask permission to ask a question. But just listening without fixing, and taking them as who they are, not who I think they should be or who I thought they were going to be, or the decisions that I would make if I was them. It's so hard not to do. But once you do it, it is the opportunity to get to know who they are.
Right. And how old are the girls now?
16, 20, and 28.
Oh my God. I felt like
my oldest
babies like 2 years ago.
I
felt like you just had your babies like 2 years ago.
I know. It's so funny. When I'm around little babies, I'm like, oh, it's so magical. And then I'm like, I don't know if I could do it. But I mean, they always say it's like the greatest learning goes on from your children. And I would definitely have to agree with that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like little human alarm clocks. The best learning. Any other thing you want to add about business, marriage, parenting? Something that's on your mind?
You know, I think I was just talking to my friend yesterday, and she said that she feels overwhelmed right now. The world, there's obviously a lot of, suffering and things happening in the world. And I guess what always feels really important to me is that there are things that we are in charge of, and there's things that we're not in charge of. And just that if we can all, however we can do it, because I feel like if you have a brand new baby, you can do it in a different way than if like you got big kids like me. It's just different times in our lives. Is that, can we show up in our lives, staying curious, but also loving? Because for me, as somebody who's very interested in being, I put in quotes, strong, what I have really learned is that in order to do that, it's like, actually, you have to be more nice, kind, not nice, kind. And I think that right now we probably need that more than ever. But I also believe, and that's why I'm such a pusher of taking care of yourself, that one of the easiest ways to do it is if you can make yourself feel good. And people are busy, and somehow that always falls to the bottom of the pile. And I just would like to invite people to, you got to do your best to take care of yourself, because how do you have a fighting chance to respond the way you want, to be able to manage, to deal with stress, to handle it all? It's a lot that people deal with. And also, like, I really believe that we all probably feel more similar than not, but it feels like the environment's trying to make us think that we're all polarizing. And I don't actually think that's true.
So, and you have an incredible podcast that talks a lot about this stuff. It's so good. I actually have my hormone specialist sending me links for your shows.
You know, one last thing too, for the females out there, I will say this when it comes to business, you know, you have to be tough and you have to say things that are uncomfortable for people and go through things that are uncomfortable, like firing people and things like that. And I just want to remind them that being straightforward and dropping off information does not make you a bad person. I think sometimes we rumble it all together and think, well, if I'm nice, that's why I said I'm not interested in nice, then I'm a good person. No, you can be direct and have people even not like you and be mad at you and still be a good person. That's just the job. And so that's something that I think, especially when you're in business, if you can be okay with that, it does probably make it a lot easier.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest lessons in business, when I had to fire people and lay them off and not give people raises when it was expected because they didn't earn the raise. And then that was months of leading up to those days, and I would lose sleep and cry. And then when it happened, it's like, oh my God, the freedom that it actually happened and nothing changed.
That's right.
Everything was great. Okay, I got one last question for you, a question I ask every guest. Okay. When I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what is that to you?
For me, being a wild woman is the opportunity to explore as many facets of who you are deep inside yourself that you're curious about, that you want to express. I think a lot of us have so many curiosities and creativities that we don't get the chance to, and also to do it your specific way. I think, you know, sometimes we think, oh, I'm supposed to date, I'm supposed to get married, I'm supposed to have kids. Yes or no? So wild is like the ability to really do it your way and know that that is the perfect way.
I love it. So Gabby, if people want to go online to find you, where can they go?
Pretty much everything's under Gabby Reece, GABBYREECE, and the Gabby Reece Show, which is probably going to be renamed to The Long Game with Gabby Reece. We're throwing that around. But yeah, that's it. And then I have XPT and Laird Superfood and Laird Apparel if you need some keep it together tights.
Yeah. I need some keep it together tights. It'll help me keep it together. Yeah.
Don't we all?
All right, Gabby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Aloha.